The Senate will come to order. The Secretary will call the roll.
Senator Buck. Senator Cannizzaro. Senator Daley. Senator Dunyate. Senator Dondera-Loop. Senator Flores. Senator Goycochea. Senator Hammond. Senator Hansen. Senator Harris. Senator Krasner. Senator Lang. Senator Neal. Senator Wynn. Senator Orenshaw. Senator Pizzina. Senator Scheibel. Senator Sievers-Gansert. Senator Spearman. Senator Stone. Senator Titus.
Let the record reflect there are 21 senators present. Please rise for the prayer by Pastor Bruce Henderson of the Airport Road Church of Christ in Carson City, and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. Oh Lord God, yes, we're still here and working hard, meetings after meetings, deadlines, and long days filled with stress. But just this morning, I read from the book of Psalms. Praise the Lord, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His faithful love endures forever. Father, help us see beyond the difficulties and find joy from your very presence as we endeavor to faithfully serve the people of Nevada. I pray in the name of the one who indeed brings joy to the world. Amen.
I pledge allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order of Business 3, reading and approval of the journal. By previous order of the Senate, the reading of the journal is dispensed with, and the President and Secretary are authorized to make necessary corrections and additions. Order of Business 16, remarks from the floor, introduction of guests. Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very much appreciate this opportunity to address this floor. Mr. Glover, would you please stand up? I have with me today, who have been waiting patiently up in the gallery, the entire Douglas County women's softball team. Here sitting with me is their coach. John Glover has worked at Douglas High for over 20 years and became the school's athletic director in 2021. He has served as the head coach of the Douglas Tigers varsity softball team since 2018. An interesting thing, John's nephew is the nephew of former Assemblyman and Senator Alan Glover, who served from 1973 through 1985 and holds his place on the Assembly Wall of Distinction. Up in the gallery, we have the Douglas County Douglas softball gals who just won the state championship in softball. So we have a proclamation for you, Mr. Glover, and all those gals up there in the gallery. Whereas the Douglas High Tigers varsity softball team in Minden, Nevada is an outstanding team of talented players and coaches that competes at the highest class of Nevada interscholastic activities, the NIAA. Whereas the Tigers demonstrated their competitive athletic skills and teamwork this season by winning the 2023 NIAA Class 5A state softball playoffs, becoming the Nevada 5A state championships. And whereas athletic director and head coach John Glover has led the Tigers since 2018, resulting in numerous victories on the fields in those years. And with the seasonal aid of assistant varsity coach Matt Trenton, Joey McNish, and Joseph Gooch, this year was no different. And whereas in their bid for the state title last year, the Tigers were runners-up in the 2021 NIAA Class 5As. However, whereas regaining their momentum from last season, the Tigers maintain an undefeated team record of 14 wins and 0 losses in the Class 5A Northern League this year, and won the 2023 NIAA Class playoffs, adding 4 wins to that record. During the 2023 season, the Tigers hit 67 home runs, breaking the NIAA all-time record for the most home runs in a single season by 7 dingers. And Being an excellent student as well as athletes, Tigers players also maintain a grade point average of 3.7 in 2023, with 3 student athletes, Madison Gooch, Alex Hyde, and Mackenzie Willis, making the all-state academic team. Returning to the state championship tournament on a 22-game winning streak, the Tigers ended the game with renewed determination to take home the victor's top trophy. And in the bottom of the 6th inning of the championship game, tied 3-3, the Tigers' first baseman, batting 7th in the lineup, catapulted a 2-run home run into deep left center field, which sealed the victory. And whereas, in a stellar display of talent representing countless hours training and hard work, the Tigers won the 2023 NIA Class 5A state softball playoffs with a record of 3 wins, 0 losses, becoming the first DHS Tiger softball team to win the state title in 31 years. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the Douglas High School Tigers varsity team is recognized for its undefeated season, bringing home Carson Valley a state championship, and be further proclaimed that the players and coaches of the DHS softball team are commended for their hard work, dedication, and team spirit. Go Tigers! Thank you. Please give them a warm welcome.
Senator Pizzina.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Today, I would like to welcome my wonderful intern who comes from UNLV, a rising senior. Please welcome Phyllis C. Pichon, who's done just a phenomenal job and who so many of you have graciously welcomed into your offices throughout the course of this session. Thank you very much.
Senator Buck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I have the pleasure of recognizing Alyssa Brown. Alyssa has been my intern from UNR throughout the session. She has been a wonderful aide to my office, showing up each week with a terrific spirit, ready to move and work and learn. Last week, Alyssa graduated from UNR with a major in political science, earning her degree in just 3 years. She's originally from Roseville, California, and will be moving back to Sacramento area with hopes of continuing her work in the legislative process in the California State Legislature. In fact, she has an interview, I believe, next week with them. She also hopes to continue her education and earn her master's degree in public policy. Her favorite experience at the legislature this session was participating in the legislative softball game. As one of the Senate stars in VP, she had 2, I believe, scores on the board. Thank goodness for them. I wanted to thank Alyssa for all of her help this session and wish her well with the bright future before her. So please join me in making her feel welcome.
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to welcome our caucus director's cousin, Talia Trenton, who is a star pitcher and home run hitter who's up in the balcony. And I haven't been able to meet her in person, but we're really excited. And Zach's been so happy to attend some of your games and wish you the best. And I think you've got a verbal agreement with Iowa for now, maybe to play there. So she's a great player. And then I wanted to address some business that we're going to get into serious business, but I want to address something that's really important, and that's welcoming Cole, welcoming the majority leader back, and Cole to be with us today. We are thrilled. So thrilled to have you here and to have Nicole safe and in your arms, and that you're able to share him with us. It's just a miracle in our presence, and we're just so grateful that you are here and so happy for you and your husband, Nate. Thank you.
Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am very lucky to have with me today Dr. Pierre Mousset-Jones, who is currently Professor Emeritus of Mining Engineering at the Mackey School of Earth Science and Engineering. I've known Dr. Mousset-Jones almost my whole life. He and my dad were buddies for mountain climbing and skiing, and loved anything involving the mountains. He started teaching at University of Nevada, Reno in 1968, retired in 2013, has written more papers than I can go over. Just going over his biography, it's so impressive. I know that he has taught I think majority of the mining engineers in our state and mining engineers who trained at UNR's Mackey School of Mines and went on to work in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. I'm very privileged to have him here, and I certainly honor his contributions to UNR and to our state. Please make him feel welcome.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am very excited today to have joining with me on the floor Saha Salahi, who has been interning in our front office for this legislative session, and it's just been a true delight, and I think a real testament to the bright future that we have here in this state for students in our higher education institutions. So Saha is part of the UNLV internship program, and she has not only grown into her position as an intern, but also has been an instrumental part of our team. She's done an amazing job this semester and has even helped me present bills in the Senate and Assembly. So we have, I'm hopeful to see, make it all the way over the finish line, a fertility fraud bill that she brought and has done so much work on to help get to this point. And so we're clearing the last hurdles, and we have our fingers crossed for that. But she did a great job researching and understanding the language and just truly doing a wonderful job and being so supportive on that. So we are also proud to say that she will be graduating from UNLV in this upcoming fall with a major in communication studies and a minor in Brookings public policy. When she is not working in the office or at school, she is out creating change as the legislative advocacy coordinator for Ignite National, where she has been working on organizing boot camps and training for young women on the national and state level to get them interested in the political process and in public discord. And we had a few of those women come and join us, I think, a week or so ago as my days blend together in the end of session. But they were just truly wonderful and amazing and just so interested in what we do. And so for her to be taking the charge on that and helping to encourage more women to engage in this process, I think is truly wonderful. And so she has just really been a true pleasure, and I think has nothing but a very bright future ahead of her. Really has been just an integral part of everything we've been doing down here in this first floor office. I cannot say enough about her, and I'm just so impressed. And so if you can help me make her feel welcome, I would appreciate it.
Okay, seeing no further remarks, we will take a brief recess to allow our guests to leave the floor. The Senate is back in order. We are on order of business 4, reports of committees.
Mr. President, your Committee on Commerce and Labor, to which were referred Assembly Bills numbers 364 and 437, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator Pat Spearman, Chair. Mr. President, your Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, to which was referred Assembly Bill number 408, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator Dallas Harris, Chair. Mr. President, your Committee on Health and Human Services, to which was referred Assembly Bill number 188, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator Fabian Dugnate, Chair. Mr. President, your Committee on Judiciary, to which were referred Assembly Bills numbers 121, 371, and 373, has had the same under consideration and begs leave to report the same back with the recommendation amend and do pass as amended. Signed, Senator Melanie Scheibel, Chair. End of reports.
Order of business 6, messages from the Assembly.
Assembly Chamber, Carson City, May 23rd, 2023. To the Honorable Senate, I have the honor to inform your honorable body that the Assembly on this day passed Senate Bills numbers 5, 29, 39, 43, 59, 105, 129, 247, 298, and 382. Also, to the Honorable Senate, I have the honor to inform your honorable body that the Assembly on this day concurred in the Senate Amendment number 542 to Assembly Bill number 556, Senate Amendment number 554 to Assembly Bill number 164, Senate Amendment number 545 to Assembly Bill number 185, Senate Amendment number 575 to Assembly Bill number 210, Senate Amendment number 691 to Assembly Bill number 214, Senate Amendment number 577 to Assembly Bill number 366. Signed, Carol Ayala Sala, Assistant Chief Clerk of the Assembly. End of messages.
Order of business 8, waivers and exemptions.
Notice of exemption, May 23rd, 2023. The Fiscal Analysis Division, pursuant to Joint Standing Rule 14.6, has determined the eligibility for exemption of Senate Bill number 362. Signed, Sarah Kaufman, Fiscal Analysis Division. May 24th, 2023. The Fiscal Analysis Division, pursuant to Joint Standing Rule 14.6, has determined the eligibility for exemption of Senate Bill number 11. Signed, Sarah Kaufman, Fiscal Analysis Division. End of notices.
Order of business 9, motions, resolutions, and notices. Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the news media personnel, as noted on the list at each senator's desk, be accepted and accredited as members of the press and be permitted appropriate space and use of the media facilities in the legislative building.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Assembly Joint Resolutions numbers 1, 5, and 1 of the 81st session and Assembly Concurrent Resolution number 5 be taken from their positions on the resolution file and placed on the resolution file for the next legislative day.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Assembly Bills numbers 11, 22, 32, 33, 34, 44, 52, 55, 70, 74, 86, 91, 97, 107, 120, 124, 143, 159, 172, 175, 177, 183, 191, 193, 213, 220, 231, 250, 262, 275, 284, 291, 305, 309, 334, 339, 342, 350, 356, 391, 398, 405, 423, and 432 and 439 be taken from their positions on general file and placed on the general file for the next legislative day.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Senator Cannizzaro.
We need a brief 1-minute recess.
We are in recess. The Senate is back in order. Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bills numbers 501, 503, and 504 be taken from their positions on general file and placed at the top of general file on the first agenda.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
That concludes order business 9. Oh. Never mind, we have some resolutions. Senate Concurrent Resolution 5, introduced by Senator Lang, urges the expansion of comprehensive cardiovascular screening programs and directs the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services to conduct a study concerning such programs. And a resolution.
Are there any amendments?
I have amendment number 614, proposed by the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services.
Senator Donate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
There are no objections, so ordered. Senator Donate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt the amendment.
You heard the motion. Senator Donate.
Thank you, Mr. President. The amendment clarifies the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services. That's part of the resolution and would require a review of the Get With the Guidelines program, considerations for reimbursement under Medicaid for remote patient monitoring dealing with cardiovascular health, and then a review of the implementation of complete streets programs to promote zoning that is more conducive to cardiovascular health and other provisions.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Are there any further amendments?
There are none.
Okay, there are no further amendments, correct? All right, then Senator, you just go to a vote.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 5, introduced by Senator Lang, urges the expansion of comprehensive cardiovascular screening programs and directs the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services to conduct a study concerning such programs. End of resolution.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Concurrent Resolution 5 urges state agencies to expand comprehensive cardiovascular screening programs to allow for earlier identification of patients at risk for cardiovascular events. Additionally, this resolution urges state agencies to collaborate with federal agencies and national organizations to expand cardiovascular screening programs and evaluate programs that improve cardiovascular health. Finally, Finally, this resolution directs the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Health and Human Services to conduct the interim study mentioned previously. The committee is required to report its findings and any other recommendations for legislation to the 83rd session. The resolution is effective upon adoption.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I urge a yes on SCR 5. Heart attacks, cardiovascular death is the #1 cause of death in the United States. And certainly having these screening programs may help extend longevity that right now is at about 77 years for the average human being in the United States. Heart attacks alone killed 695,000 people in 2021. And over 163,000 stroke victims in 2021. There are a lot of things that could be detected by screening, such as high blood pressure, which is a silent killer for many people, especially those that have weight issues, obesity issues, those that have comorbidities such as diabetes, mellitus. So this is a good move in Nevada to help do the screenings and make sure that we protect our citizens from the #1 killer in the United States. Thank you. Please support SCR 5.
Are there further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion is carried. The resolution is adopted and ordered transmitted to the Assembly.
Assembly Joint Resolution 8, introduced by Assemblyman De Silva, et cetera, and Senator Donate, et cetera, urges the Congress of the United States to deschedule marijuana as a Schedule I controlled substance. End of resolution.
Are there any amendments?
There are none.
Senator Orenshaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Assembly Joint Resolution 8 urges the United States Congress to support legislation to remove cannabis from Schedule I of the Controlled Substance Use Act. At the hearing in the Senate and the Assembly, there was a lot of testimony and support from different organizations. I've been going over some of the letters in support. One of them that's very poignant is from the Washoe County Health District. I would urge members to support this resolution.
Any further remarks from the floor? Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sorry to be hogging some time on the floor today, but this is a very important resolution, AGR 8, that I urge a yes on. As you know, cannabis, marijuana is a Schedule I drug. the federal government contradicts itself because the DEA has it as Schedule I drug, which means that it's abusable but has no efficacy. Well, we know that marijuana does have efficacy because even the FDA has approved a THC derivative called Marinol used for wasting or increasing the appetite of people that have either AIDS or cancer. So, you know, we have a lot of dispensaries, not only in Nevada, but throughout the United States. And because our banking system is based on federal regulations, it's impossible for marijuana dispensaries to legitimately deposit their sales into bank accounts. One could opine that there's a lot of honest dispensaries out there that are depositing boatfuls of cash, but I would imagine there's probably some cash that never makes it to the bank. And so this would allow the banks to begin accepting deposits from marijuana retailers and wholesalers. And it just makes sense to take it off Schedule I and put it on another schedule so it can, in fact, be tracked. But it does have medical efficacy. It doesn't belong to be a Schedule I drug, and for those reasons, we should take it off. I urge a yes vote on AGR 8.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Any who wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 18, the noes are 3. AJR 8 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
That concludes Order of Business 9.
Order of Business 12, second reading.
Assembly Bill 51, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary, makes various changes relating to public safety. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
I have amendment number 713, proposed by the Senate Committee on Judiciary.
Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of Amendment 664.
If there are no objections, so ordered. Senator Scheibel.
I move to adopt Amendment 664 to Assembly Bill 121.
You've heard the motion. Senator Scheibel.
Amendment 664 adds provisions authorizing the Director of the Nevada Department of Corrections, with the approval of the Board of Prisons, to adopt regulations exempting the Department of Corrections from the requirement to provide original physical mail to an offender. However, such regulations may only be adopted if and after conducting a study using evidence-based methods the Director determines that providing original mail presents a danger to staff or offenders. All these regulations must be adopted in accordance with the Nevada Administrative Procedures Act, better known as 233B. Finally, the amendment also adds language in Section 3 clarifying that a critical medical condition includes extreme physical illness resulting from a drug or alcohol overdose.
Senator Scheibel, is that AB 51 with Amendment 713?
No, it is not.
Okay. All right.
Sorry.
Scheibel.
Are we?
We're on.
How about Amendment 713? Could I waive reading of that?
Yes, we're on AB 51, Amendment 713, correct.
And I would also like to move for adoption of Amendment 713 to Assembly Bill 51.
You've heard the motion. Senator Scheibel.
This is also an amendment to a judiciary bill, but a very different judiciary bill. And the amendment is also very different because what it does is revises provisions of the bill to clarify the circumstances under which a peace officer is to arrest a person suspected of committing battery constituting domestic violence subsequent to the initial incident or call for service, and also expands and clarifies the definition of a victim's advocate relating to the privilege of confidential communication between a victim of certain crimes and such an advocate.
Thank you. Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. AB 51 as amended is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and to the general file.
Assembly Bill 272, introduced by Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, establishes provisions relating to mail theft. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
I have amendment number 566, proposed by the Senate Committee on Judiciary.
Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to dispense with the reading of whatever amendment this is.
No objections, so ordered. Senator Scheibel.
I move to adopt Amendment 566 to Senate Bill 272.
You've heard the motion. Senator Scheibel.
Amendment 566 removes references to personally identifying information and deletes the phrase "breaks open" regarding certain mailboxes.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. AB 272 as amended is ordered reprinted, engrossed, and in the general file.
That concludes order of business 12.
Okay, order of business 13, general file.
Senate Bill 501, introduced by Finance, establishes for the 2023-2025 biennium the subsidies to be paid to the Public Employees Benefits Program for insurance for certain active and retired public officers and employees. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 4, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 501 establishes the state's monthly contribution amounts for for health insurance benefits provided to active employees and retiree participants in the Public Employees Benefits Program for the 2023-25 biennium. For active participants, the state's contribution towards the total monthly cost is $730 per month in fiscal year 24 and $759 per month in fiscal year 25. For retiree participants not eligible for Medicare, the base state monthly contribution is $515 per month in 24 and $545 in 25. For Medicare eligible retirees, participants were enrolled in the PEB-P-sponsored Individual Medicare Market Exchange. The base state contribution is $13 per month for 15 years of state service, which equates to approximately $195 per month.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change your vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the noes are 0. SB 501 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 503, introduced by Finance, ensures sufficient funding for K-12 public education for the 2023-2025 biennium. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 17, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Neal.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 503 provides funding for K-12 public education for the 23-25 biennium. The total public support for school districts, charter schools, and university schools for profoundly gifted pupils is estimated to average $12,863 per pupil in FY 2024 and $13,368 per pupil in FY 2025. Section 3 appropriates $1.1 billion in FY 2024 and $1.5 billion in FY 2025 from the State General Fund to the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account in the State Education Fund. Section 4 authorizes other revenue of $4.4 billion in FY 2024 and $4.3 billion in FY 2025 to be received and expended for state support of K-12 public education. These other revenues include, but are not limited to, local school support tax, public schools operating property tax, governmental service tax, and annual excise tax on slot machines, transfers from the Permanent School Fund and revenue from mineral leases on federal land, room tax revenue, recreational marijuana, retail excise tax, and transfers from the Cannabis Compliance Board. Sections 5 and Section 6 require the Department of Education to transfer total funding of $194.8 million in both FY 2024 and FY 2025 to school districts for food services and transportation. Total funding of $483.8 million in FY 2024 and $483.9 million in FY 2025 for local funding for pupils with disability. The statewide base per pupil funding amount is $8,966 per pupil in FY 2024 and $9,414 per pupil in FY 2025. Enrollment is projected to slightly increase to 471,283 pupils in FY 2024 and 471,754 pupils in FY 2025. In Sections 5 and Section 6, it further provides additional weighted funding for each English learner, at-risk, and gifted and talented pupil estimated to be enrolled in a public school, which is expressed as a multiplier or weight to the statewide base per pupil funding amount. The multiplier for English learner pupils is 0.45 for each year of 23-25 biennium, with a total funding of $212.5 million in FY 2024 and $223.2 million in FY 2025. The multiplier for at-risk pupils is 0.35 for each year of the 23-25 biennium, with a total funding of $198.7 million in FY 2024 and $208.6 million in FY 2025. The multiplier for gifted and talented pupils is 0.12 for each year of the 23-25 biennium, with a total funding of $8 million in FY 2024 and $8.4 million in FY 2025. Section 7 provides general fund appropriations of $245.7 million in FY 2024 and $252.8 million in FY 2025 for the state support of pupils with disabilities. In addition, revenue of $2.2 million in each year of 23-25 biennium are authorized for expenditure to provide additional support for extraordinary high-cost pupils with disabilities. Section 8 provides general fund appropriations totaling $44.3 million in each year of the 23-25 biennium to the other state education programs budget for categorical grant programs, including, but not limited to, the career and technical education, jobs for Nevada graduates, and the incentivizing pathways to teaching grant programs. Section 9 provides general fund appropriations totaling $7.7 million in each year of the 23-25 biennium for the professional development programs account. Section 10 distributes $7.6 million of this funding in each year of the 23-25 biennium for the 3 regional professional development training programs. Section 11 distributes $100,000 of this funding in each year of the 23-25 biennium for the statewide Council for the Coordination of the Regional Training Programs to provide additional training opportunities for educational administrators in Nevada. And Section 12 provides general fund appropriations of $560,000 and $886,000 in each year of the 23-25 biennium for the 1/5 Retirement Credit Purchase Program account. Section 13 provides general fund appropriations of $2.4 million in each year of the 23-25 biennium and authorizes $3.8 million in FY 24 and $4 million in FY 25 to continue the Teach Nevada Scholarship Program. Section 14 appropriates $3.2 million in each year of the 23-25 biennium to the Interim Finance Committee that may be requested by the Department of Education to increase the funding for the Teach Nevada Scholarship Program. Section 15 authorizes $851.7 million in FY24 and $878.9 million in FY 2025 for the Education Stabilization Account, otherwise known as the K-12 Rainy Day Account. Section 16 revises the definition of at-risk pupils in statute and consistent with the revised identification of such pupils as approved by the money committees. Section 17 indicates July 1st, 2023, that this bill will become effective.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in strong support of K-12 education, but I'm opposed to the way SB 503 is written, and I'm going to give you a couple of reasons and lay it out. We spent months going over the education bill, and we've done so much good work around career tech ed and special ed and the weights, shifting some of the weights around to make sure we cover English language learners and at-risk students. And we all agree that we want to put a substantial amount of money into education. And you just listen to the list, which was extensive. I think it adds up to about $6 billion a year. So it's a big pot of funds for both years. The executive budget proposed that a portion that's in this bill that was one shot. So when we finish a biennium, like this biennium, there's sometimes money left over that rolls to the next biennium. The way the executive budget was written at that portion, it's about $291 million, was supposed to go to early literacy programs in the teacher pipeline, so 2 types of programs. And the reason it's important that the money was going there, there's a couple of reasons. It's one-shot money. It's money that we have now, but we don't know whether we're going to have it in the future. And we need to make sure that the budget is structurally sound. And that's why the governor used the one-shot for one-shot and the ongoing, the $2 billion, like over $2 billion was added to the budget for ongoing expenses. And what happens if you use one shot and you put that into ongoing funds, you can create a fiscal cliff. Like right now, our revenues are very strong. The economic reform came in, they continue to be strong, but we don't quite know where we're going to be. And when you look at education, we never want to cut it. We always want to make sure that we prioritize it and we fully fund it. And we could be, it becomes sort of a maintenance of effort. Once you put the money in, you have to maintain it. So the difficulty in the bill is the $291 million still needs to go to education. All of the money needs to go to education, but we need to make sure that we cover early literacy programs in the teacher pipeline. Now, I'm confident that this body, all of us, prioritize those things, that we understand that our students need to be able to read and that early literacy programs are extremely important. So I'm confident that we're going to find a way to get there with some money. But there was $145 million for that. And when you think about how our students are performing, during the 2021 session, our superintendent of schools gave me a stat that's still lodged in my head. I think it was 114,000 of our students, and we had about 480,000 students in total that year, were not reading at grade level. And so early literacy is important. Reading by 3rd grade is important. If you want to change the trajectory of our entire educational system, we have to make sure our children can read. In 2019, it was the first time on the nation's report card, also called NAEPS test, our 4th graders, it's a 4th grade test, merged with a national average. We dropped because of COVID, and we need to make sure we get back to there. At the same time, we were actually starting to converge in mathematics. And that, again, I believe is based on reading and being able to read. So the issues with this bill is twofold. We're using money that should be one time for ongoing expenses and inflating the budget. And again, all this money, no matter which way it's done, goes to education. And the other thing is that we want to make sure that we focus on early literacy and then the teacher pipeline. We know that we're short on teachers. We have long-term subs. We're looking at incentives and all types of things to try to help get more teachers in the classroom, and we also know our teachers want raises, so we want to make sure we have a strong teacher pipeline. So for that reason, I oppose the bill, but I want to make it very clear. All the money would go to K through 12 education. We all strongly support education. I know we all support literacy. I know we all support teachers. It's just the way that this bill is written, and I appreciate the time and the finance chair and all the time that we spent working on this legislation to make sure that we could get as much money to the children as possible and that we could do the best that we could. Thank you.
Senator Neal.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to say this. I deeply respect my colleague from Senate District 15, and I was reading, because I like to read a lot, but I was reading in the debates, in the proceedings, and this is kind of fits today, that even the delegates who were trying to decide what our Nevada Constitution would say around education stated in the debates and proceedings in the Nevada State Constitution in pages 565 through 577 said that we should always debate with earnest and zealousness in the cause for education. But they also cited and established in our Nevada Constitution that we have a paramount duty in order to make sure that there are adequate provisions for education for all children within the state, and to execute that duty by requiring uniform, efficient, safe, secure, and a high-quality system of free public schools. They continue to then say that in the Nevada Constitution under Article 11, that it is within the legislature to have the discretion in order to fulfill that duty to provide intellectual, literary, mining, scientific, mechanical, and agricultural interest of the students in this state. But they further delineated that the Constitution under Article 11, Section 2 and 6 said their only requirement of three things. One, fund public schools from the general fund. We definitely did that in abundance. As my colleague said, somewhere around $6 billion. Two, we're supposed to appropriate funds for public schools before any other appropriation. We've done that. Three, we're supposed to appropriate funds deemed to be sufficient for public schools. We have consistently had an argument over what is adequacy and what is fair and equitable. But in this stage, we are making moves on adequate provisions for funding public education, K-12 in the state of Nevada. $6 billion is the largest number we've ever been able to maintain in a session where we didn't raise any revenue. And I find it concerning when we use K-12 as a political issue when this is the most funding that we've ever been able to put forward. And it's not the last, because as you know, in the Education Commission, we have been seeking to figure out how do we get beyond adequacy, but actually to be fully funded. And we're on that road, we're on that trajectory. We could be even faster on that road if we would have passed any type of revenue as dictated by the Education Commission that studied. But I want to swing back to the constitutional provision, because I think it matters when the founders of this state and the framers of our Nevada Constitution said it is a paramount duty to make adequate provisions for education. I don't know how $4.4 billion in 2024 is less than adequate. I also don't understand how $194.8 million in 2024 and 2025 for food services and transportation is falling short of adequacy. I'm also not clear on how the general fund appropriations of $7.7 million each year for professional development, which says that we're not only trying to bake money into the teacher pipeline, we're trying to make sure that they're trained as well. And then on top of that, we're still saying we're going to allow young teachers to come in with the Teach Nevada scholarships with roughly $7.8 million over the 23-25 biennium. And then on top of that, one of the largest conversations that we had during the interim, and this was totally bipartisan, was around how do we take care of students with disabilities and make sure that they are going to be adequately treated in the system. And so in Section 7, we said as a group that we would fund $245.7 million in FY24, and then $252.8 million in FY28 just to support our pupils with disabilities. I deeply respect all of my colleagues in this chamber, but I think that we have moved ourselves ahead in terms of what the framers have set forth for us in the debates. what they set forth for us in the Constitution under Article 11, Section 1, Section 2, and Section 6.
Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in strong support of Senate Bill 503. And I think I have a lot of reasons to do so, right? Just $12 billion in education. That's 12 billion reasons to stand up in support of this piece of legislation. But more importantly, we have been in this chamber to make decisions about cutting education. I never want to be in that position again. So I can appreciate the idea that we want to be fiscally responsible. I can appreciate that we want to, when we are funding education, think about what this means for the future. And I think that that conversation has to happen in sort of two fronts. First, we can be fiscally responsible. We can also do that while putting money into education and investing in students. Those two things do not have to be diametrically opposed. And I do not believe that Senate Bill 503 puts us in a position where we are facing fiscal cliffs, where we are being fiscally irresponsible, because what Senate Bill 503 also represents is one of the largest investments in savings for the education stabilization account that we have had in the history of the state. And there are increases to that to raise the cap to 20%. We are putting approximately, with this budget, over $878 million into the education stabilization account to ensure that if we're talking about having to cut education, which we all know things happen. No one here would have predicted a global pandemic that would cause us to come in and have to make cuts to the budget, including some cuts to education. But I think being responsible about saving money and also saying and recognizing that we need to do more in education, those two things can be consistent. They don't have to be one or the other. It's not an A or B choice, it's a both choice. And I think that Senate Bill 503 represents that. I want to share just a little bit about why it is that I find myself very passionate about public education here in this state. My parents were a bartender and a waitress. They didn't graduate from high school, didn't have an education. And I watched them work really hard every single day in and day out, to make sure that my sisters and I had every opportunity that we could possibly have. But those opportunities largely came because we were in public school with teachers in our classrooms who cared about us. When I was maybe 7 or 8, I decided, for probably reasons that pertain nothing to my current career, that I wanted to be a lawyer. My mom worked downtown. She was a waitress at a local cafe called the Gourmet Cafe, where a lot of lawyers used to go and eat lunch. And there would be times where my parents working separate shifts. My dad worked the swing shift. My mom worked the day shift. So there was always someone with the kids and always somebody working. And so I didn't get to have them together a lot. And there were times once I started going to school where my dad had to kind of pick me up from school, leave me with my mom so she could take me home, so that there was a way for me to get home, dad to get to work on time, and mom to leave work and come get my sisters from some of the neighbor ladies who would watch them. And so I got an opportunity to see all these fancy lawyers coming in suits with their legal notepads, and they were there having lunch, and they seemed really important. I didn't know anybody who wore a suit to work. I knew people who wore uniforms to work, but I didn't know anybody who wore a suit to work. Anybody who I saw in a suit was going to a funeral or a wedding. And so for me as a young kid, I thought, these people seem really cool. I just really want to be a lawyer when I grow up. That's what I want to do with my life. And so began a very long journey to receiving a law degree and being able to practice in the courthouse that was right across the street from a little cafe where a little girl watched her mom wait tables for lawyers, and where I got to walk into that building and into that cafe as a lawyer myself. That kind of opportunity does not exist without the tenacity and the dedication of the people in this building to make sure that a kid like me, who didn't know anything about how to apply for college, I actually got accepted to college because I happened to be in the office one day when a recruiter from the University of Nevada, Reno was there recruiting students, and I hadn't applied to college yet. And I was a senior with a good GPA on the swim team, speech and debate team, involved in extracurricular activities, and didn't know how I was going to get to college because we didn't know how to do that. No one was there to advocate for me to figure out that you had to, fill out a FOFSA, you had to fill out applications and how to do that, and how to put together a transcript. No one was there to help me do that because my parents didn't know how to do that. My parents didn't know how to help me with my homework when I needed help. And not because they weren't great parents, because I have some of the best parents in the world, but because they didn't have that education. And so for me, that meant that there had to be someone in the school, a teacher who cared about me, to say, you can do better in this. You can work harder. You can get a good grade. Let me help you figure out how to do algebra. There had to be someone there for a kid like me to help advocate for me, because there wasn't a parent saying, you can go to this school or you can, achieve this. They said, we'll support you in whatever we want. We don't know how to help you get you, but we're right here behind you. I got accepted to college because that recruiter and I started chit-chatting while I was waiting to fax over a sheet to another high school for participants in a debate tournament, and said, where are you going to college? And I said, I have no idea. She said, what's your GPA like? What are you doing in school? Are you taking AP classes? And so I kind of told her a little bit, and she was like, look, we'll take you right now. We'll admit you on site. And that's how I got into college. And I got a really fantastic education, both in the public schools in Las Vegas, at the University of Nevada, Reno. And that's why, when I stand up here and I say go Pack, it's not just to sort of nudge my colleague from Senate District 8. It's because I feel really lucky that there were investments in higher ed for kids like me. I attended school on a Millennium Scholarship. And then I got the opportunity to go down to UNLV and earn a law degree and become the lawyer that I wanted to become since age 7. But that does not happen unless the people in this body are willing to invest in kids like me. For me, Senate Bill 503 is a bill that we should support, not because there's one particular thing that we wish the funding was like a little bit different on, but because it represents a historic investment in our kids, in kids who need teachers in their classrooms to advocate for them, who need that system to give them those opportunities because they just don't have them unless we invest in public education, unless we invest in higher education. That, to me, is one of the most important things. It's one of the reasons why I ran for office. It's one of the reasons why I stand on this floor, and I am excited to vote for this bill. When we talk about fiscal cliffs, I want to address one really important thing here, because there was mention of $291 million that actually ended up in the pupil-centered funding plan. And when we talk about the pupil-centered funding plan, we're talking about a per-pupil investment that in this particular bill increases and represents almost a 30% increase in per pupil funding. Now, that does not get Nevada to the place where we are #1 in the nation, but what it does is give us a huge stride forward. And to me, I can't ignore that. It's $3,159 per pupil increase for fiscal year 24, and a $3,075 increase for fiscal year 25 per pupil. That's an investment. That is every single one of those dollars patting that kid on the back and saying, you can do this. If what you want to be is fill in the blank, you can do this. And so when we talk about that 291, that was extra money in the pupil-centered funding plan that, by the way, in the governor's recommended budget was slated to go into the education stabilization account, right, which helps to protect against instances where we may need to help support education in a downturn. But that's additional money going into that account, over and above the $878 million that we are talking about. And that money was then, with interest earnings, set to, if there are other policy bills passed, support some early literacy and teacher pipeline stuff. We don't have to do one or the other. And Senate Bill 503 didn't take that money and turn it from a one-shot money appropriation into some sort of ongoing expense that we are unable to overcome. And for me, $291 million into our students, into that per pupil spend, to make sure that we're supporting kids as much as we can in their educational opportunities is so worth it and is not a fiscal cliff. $291 million is not a fiscal cliff that we are going to fall off of. And for what it is worth, interest earnings in a way to fund ongoing programs for early childhood literacy and for things like Teacher Pipeline, which we want to build and continue over time, which we want to make available to people over time, are ongoing programs and a very unstable way to actually fund those with interest earnings. Unpredictable, unreliable, unstable. So for us in the Finance Committee, that was not the decision to be made. And a better decision was to invest that in students on a per pupil basis. And that's what this budget is. There's also mention in here of, in this bill, there's funding for Teach Nevada scholarships to help improve our teacher pipeline. We know that those are scholarships going to Nevadans who are staying here, who are teaching here. It's $11.2 million into those pieces. And in total, $15 million for educational professional development. There are so many good things in this budget. Funding for higher education, funding for teachers to support them, to bring them in. So every student has a teacher in the classroom saying, you can do this, you can do better, you can achieve. Let me show you how to get from where you want to go, from where you are to where you want to go. And for so many students who rely on public education, for that to be their pathway, and for that to be their support team, and for that to be the answer for how it is that they get to achieve their dreams, for me, the only vote you can take on Senate Bill 503 for a historic investment in public education to support students is a yes. And to find some tiny thing to hang your hat on, I don't think I could tell 7-year-old me that because there was a little bit of extra money in education, $291 million, which for that student amounts to a small amount of that additional money per pupil, that, sorry, I didn't want to vote for education funding for you to get access to that, because, well, we could have put it into a savings account and had interest earnings. I think there are ways to do both. And I don't think I could say to 7-year-old me or any 7-year-old in our public school system or any student in our education system that I just couldn't get there. So I would urge a yes vote on Senate Bill 503. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, it's time for my annual history lesson. I show up every session with this same article from the Reno Evening Gazette from January 16th, 1947, which is exactly 76 years and some months ago. And the first paragraph of this says, cost of operation of the Nevada Public Schools and the need for additional funds to support the school system will be one of the foremost issues before the coming session of the legislature. So we have, at least with this article that my dear father saved, is 76 years old. We've been talking about it that long. Within this article, one of the things they say is the cost per pupil, average daily attendance, has risen from $124 in 1936 to $150 in 1945, or a total increase of $26 per pupil. One of the things that we're talking about doing is adding like $900 per pupil. This is 76 years later. And while I understand there's some concern about not knowing if we'll have dollars in the future, they didn't know if they had dollars in the future either. While I understand that we want to commit to the future, I think we have a really good reason to commit to the future right here on this floor today. We have Cole Nathan. And do you know how long we have to commit to him? 5 years.
Our terms are only 4. We have 5 years before that baby goes to school. So put that in perspective, because I think most of us on this floor, excepting a few of us, may have children who have already gone through school. So it's not my kid, it's my grandkids. But as I always say, and I've said to my colleague behind me here, until it's your kid, until it's your kid. So until it's your kid that has to go to school, how do you feel about that? Teachers, sure, we need teachers, but we can't have teachers if we don't vote for a budget. And you can't say, I support, and then vote no, because there is no button like that. I've been in this business for a long, long time, and I had the exact opposite experience as my colleague from Senate District 6. I had a father that was dirt poor and went to UNR and became a teacher and came to Las Vegas in 1931 to be a teacher under Maud Fraser. Think about that. And then he went to war, and when he came back, he lived here in Carson City. And that's, I'm sure, why he saved this article. And then he went back to Las Vegas. And when I was born, I went to the office. And guess what I loved? I wanted to be a teacher because even though they were much thicker and bigger things, I used to play with these as a kid. I thought that was the best thing ever because I played school. And I always wanted to be a teacher. There was never anything I wanted to do but be a teacher. Teaching's a really hard profession, and if everybody around you doesn't rally and support and fund, yeah, we're not going to have enough teachers. So I just am not going to go back through the bill. Everybody's done that. But I'm just going to say that raising per pupil expenditures by 29% is one of the things we can do today. And we shouldn't be bargaining over kids. We shouldn't be bargaining over coal. We shouldn't be bargaining over case. And we sure as hell shouldn't be bargaining over the next generation of students that need us today and now. Thank you.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. A few years ago, I asked the director of DHHS to tell me what the SNAP rolls look like, and was shocked and embarrassed to find out that at that time, teachers were the second highest number receiving public benefits, receiving SNAP. And I thought to myself, how in the world do we do that? The teacher is the one that taught us, that got us here. How we do that? Then during the pandemic, I had several teachers call me, many of them from a couple of the schools in my district, asking for help because they could not afford their rent. And I came in this session determined to try to do what I could to help. When you look here at one of the things that this budget does, historic investment in public education, nearly $12 billion for the 23-25 biennium, a 26% increase over the current biennium, educational programs to attract teachers to Nevada schools. I don't know that we attract teachers to Nevada by saying, come on over here, move to Nevada. We'll help you get your SNAP card. Really? So I don't understand that. I always say that 10% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And as a former teacher and as a former president of a school board, I know a little bit about how teachers struggle to make it. This may not be perfect, but I'm voting yes because I cannot allow perfect to be the enemy of good. I urge your yes vote. Thank you.
Any further remarks? Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of Senate Bill 503, partially because I wanted to give my colleague from District 14 some time to get back from the restroom, and partially because I support public education in the state of Nevada. I was born and raised here. Every school that I've ever been to in the state of Nevada was a public school. I remember a special session where I sat in the back there and had to take votes that really made me question why we were here. Those were some of the saddest votes that I've had to take. And I am equally elated to be able to now pump $2 billion extra dollars into education where it belongs. I don't think it makes any sense for us to not fund our education system in exchange for directing where $291 million go. What happened to local control? We're going to fund the Department of Education. We're going to fund our children. Some of the members in this body will vote yes and do the job. Others will have the luxury of voting no, simply because they don't like everything that's in the bill. But what happened to compromise? One of the things I've always loved about this state legislature is that we often compromise and have discussions and do what is best for our constituents better than the federal government does at times. Congress can be a mess. But in this legislature, we always come together. This is a perfect time to show our constituents what that looks like. I urge you all to vote yes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to 503, and I appreciate every person's comments in this building this afternoon. I will say that there's not a single person here that isn't committed to education. I, too, am a product of Nevada public education system in a little small schoolhouse where I had 12 kids in my class. As a matter of fact, my daughter had about 20 in her class, my mom had 12 in her class, and my grandmother had 3, all in the same Nevada public schools. The issue for me is not that we do not support public education or education. My issue is that this is my 5th session in this building, and every single session we have put more money into education. This session, we are putting $2 billion more in education. And you're right, that little guy is who we're putting this money in for, and my grandkids in this state. What we want is we want to fund education, but we also want accountability, we want better outcomes, and we want to know that we can continue to fund it in the future. This bill leaves us no real hope in doing that. We continue to hear the rhetoric that, oh, you guys won't fund this because you won't increase the taxes. But the reality is we do have some money that we can move forward, and we can be wise about this, and we can fund education without raising taxes. What this bill does is use monies, in my belief, in my personal belief, in inappropriate places where we should be using other funds to get the job done. So I will be no on this, and I do support public education. Thank you.
Any further remarks? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 13, the noes are 8. SB 503 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Senate Bill 504, introduced by Finance, authorizes expenditures by agencies of the state government for the 2023-2025 biennium. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 29, end of subsection 3, end of bill.
Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. This one's a long one, so bear with me. I'll try and get through it as quick as I can. I promise I'm reading the short version. It won't seem like it, but I am. Senate Bill 504 provides funding and authorizes the expenditure of funding other than state general fund appropriations or state highway fund appropriations. The funding sources include federal funds, self-funded budgets receiving money through fees or other means, and revenue sources such as licensing fees, gifts, grants, interagency transfers, and other funds, which total $31.71 billion over the 2023-25 biennium. Additionally, due to the specific statutory language for these agencies, Senate Bill 504 includes authority for the Nevada Gaming Control Board and the Nevada Gaming Commission to expend $69.5 million from the general fund over the 2023-25 biennium. Similarly, the bill includes authority for the Department of Transportation to expend $840.5 million from the Highway Fund over the 2023-25 biennium. With respect to the Office of the State Treasurer, the Money Committee's approved total funding of $1.4 million over the 2023-25 biennium for the personnel and operating costs to add 8 new positions for support of the implementation of the Statewide Council on Financial Independence and Individual Development Account Program, and for the office's Investment Division, Cash Management Division, College Savings Division, Unclaimed Property Division, and Nevada Able Savings Program. With respect to the Cannabis Compliance Board, the Money Committee's approved reserve reductions totaling $1.5 million over the 2023-25 biennium for 8 new full-time positions for additional supervisory and informational technology support. The Money Committee's further approved reserve reductions of $358,704 over the 2023-25 biennium to relocate the Cannabis Compliance Board's Carson City office. With respect to the Nevada System of Higher Education. In closing the budgets of the Nevada System of Higher Education, the Money Committee's approved revenue from all sources totaling $2.23 billion for the 2023-25 biennium. Of the total revenue, non-general fund revenues total $761 million, or 34.1% of total funding, and include student registration fees, non-resident tuition, student application fees, federal and county revenues, and a transfer from the non-state supported budget. With respect to the Governor's Office of Economic Development, the Money Committee's authorized non-general fund revenues of $77.2 million over the 2023-25 biennium, which includes $62.9 million in federal, state, small business credit initiative funds. The Money Committee approved the Governor's recommendation to reorganize the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs and authorize room tax revenues of $30.1 million in fiscal year 24 and $32.7 million in fiscal year 2025 in the new Tourism Cultural Affairs Administration budget. With respect to the Department of Health and Human Services Director's Office for the Fund for Resilient Nevada, the Money Committee has approved opioid settlement fund reserve reductions of $12.2 million over the 2023-25 biennium to support allocations to various public and private entities to address the impact of opioid and other substance use disorders in the state in accordance with the needs assessment and statewide plan developed to address these issues. In closing the Aging and Disability Services Division budgets, the Money Committee has authorized cost allocation revenues of $1.0 million over the 2023-25 biennium to support 10 new positions and associated costs, including 5 positions to support information technology needs, 4 positions to provide human resources support, and 1 administrative service officer to support central fiscal services as recommended by the Governor. In closing the budgets of the Division of Healthcare, Financing, and Policy, the Money Committee has approved a new private hospital provider tax and budget, including authorized private hospitals provider tax revenue of $572.3 million, transfers to the Medicaid budget totaling $405.4 million to fund the non-federal share of supplemental and direct payments totaling $1.06 billion, and transfers to the Medicaid administrative budget to fund administrative activities, including 5 positions and associated expenditures totaling $886,272 over the 2022-25 biennium. In closing the budgets of the Division of Public and Behavioral Health, the Money Committee has approved $30 million in telecom fees over the 2023-25 biennium to support the crisis response programs, including the 988 Crisis Call Center and Crisis Stabilization Centers, as well as 1 existing position and 10 new full-time positions and associated expenditures. The Money Committee has also approved 5 new full-time faculty surveyor positions and associated expenditures totaling $813,913 in child care and development block grant funds over the 2023-25 biennium. Finally, the Money Committee has approved the Governor's recommendation to transfer the child care licensing program to the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services to consolidate related child care facility programs under one division and provide for efficiency. For the Child Assistance and Development budget, the Money Committee has approved a combination of Child Care and Development Fund discretionary and mandatory matching block grant revenues totaling $3.3 million over the 2023-25 biennium for 14 new positions, including 7 positions to support the Child Care Service Centers and 7 positions to provide improved strategic planning and oversight. The Money Committee has also approved additional temporary assistance for needing family block grant funding totaling $20 million over the 2023-25 biennium to increase child care subsidies for the new employees of Nevada program. For the Department of Transportation, the Money Committee has approved 50 new positions for the department to administer essential programs and comply with federal and state laws. The Money Committee has also approved the governor's recommendation for the sale of highway revenue bonds and associated interest earnings of $151.5 million in fiscal year 24 for construction projects. Ta-da.
Okay, are there any remarks on the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. Yeses are 21, the nays are 0. SB 504 has received the constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly. The following bills are ready.
Mr. President?
Senator Lang, yes.
I would like to move that we move Senate Bill 367 to the end of the general file.
All right, so ordered. Okay, thank you. The following bills are ready to be immediately transmitted to the Assembly. Senate Bills 501, 503, and 504. Once these bills have been transmitted to the Assembly, the Senate no longer has the ability to take any further action. Are there any objections or comments? Seeing none, we will move on.
Assembly Bill 13, introduced by Assembly Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions related to governmental administration. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 2, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Orenshaw, right? Senator Krasner.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 13 imposes a time limit of 60 working days after the date on which an alleged violation of certain whistleblower laws occurred, or the date of a related reprisal or retaliatory action for a state officer or employee to file a written appeal. The measure eliminates the authority of a hearing officer to order the termination of employment of the proper person determined to have violated certain whistleblower protections.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the noes are 0. AB 13 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 20, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources, revises provisions relating to water. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 28, this act becomes effective upon passage and approval. This bill requires a 2/3 majority vote.
Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 20 revises the acceptable uses of money received and entities eligible to receive money from the account to finance the construction of treatment works and the implementation of pollution control projects in accordance with federal law. The bill also revises how funding received from the account for the revolving fund and the account for set-aside programs may be used in accordance with federal law. Finally, the bill expands the list of eligible recipients receiving certain grants from the board for financing water projects and removes the requirement that not more than 3 members of the board may be of the same political party. Bill is effective upon passage and approval.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 20, the noes are 1. AB 20 has received a 2/3 vote, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 23, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor, revises provisions relating to the resolution of certain administrative citations issued by the State Contractors Board. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 6, end of Section 6, end of bill.
Senator Pazina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 23 creates an additional informal process for the resolution of an administrative citation issued by the State Contractors Board. A person who has issued such a citation may submit a written request to the executive officer of the board for an informal citation conference within 15 business days after the citation was served. The executive officer is required to conduct an informal citation conference within 60 business days after receiving such a request and must affirm, modify, or dismiss the citation. The bill sets forth certain actions and procedures that may be taken during the informal citation conference, including but not limited to prohibiting that offers or settlements of other statements discussed during the conference be used as admissions in a subsequent hearing. A person may contest the executive officer's decision within 15 business days after the informal citation conference. If a person submits written notice of his or her intent to contest the citation within that period, or if that period is extended by the board is required to hold a hearing on the matter. An affirmed or modified citation is a final order of the board and is not subject to review by a court or agency. The failure of a person to comply with a final order constitutes cause for disciplinary action by the board, and this bill is effective October 1, 2023.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Hansen.
Thanks, Mr. President. I rise in strong support of Assembly Bill 23. As a licensed contractor, one of the big problems we've had in Nevada are illegal unlicensed contractors, and the Contractors Board has been very aggressive over the years trying to help get that problem under control. This will be simply an additional tool needed in that effort. So on behalf of all the other licensed contractors in Nevada, we want to encourage the Contractors Board to continue their efforts, and we're delighted to see this bill passing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the noes are 0. AB 23 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 35, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary, revises provisions governing the access of offenders to telecommunications devices. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 2, end of subsection 2, end of bill.
Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 35 removes statutory provisions authorizing offenders to have access to a telecommunications device and instead requires the Director of the Department of Corrections to adopt regulations authorizing an offender to possess, have in his or her custody or control, and use a telecommunications device for certain purposes, including communicating with his or her child or attorney, appearing in court, receiving medical care, applying for a governmental program, performing legal research, obtaining educational training, job training, or applying for jobs for when they leave the Department of Corrections. This would make us the 49th state to enact a similar policy, allowing people who are in custody to have access to a broader range of educational and job training opportunities.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to rise in support of AB 35. These devices are being provided to our inmates at no charge to the taxpayers. It's going to also make our prison guards safer because they're going to be able to do calls right from their cells. And more importantly, I think it's going to contribute to a lower recidivism rate because it's going to allow these convicts, inmates, to actually further their education while they're serving their time, getting a community college degree or even get a baccalaureate degree or learn a trade. And so just to dispel some rumors, it's not taxpayer funded. It does not allow the inmates to have any unfettered access to the internet. There's an intermediary to make sure that they don't have access to the internet. And this again is going to reduce recidivism, and that's why I support this bill and urge a yes vote.
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 19, the noes are 2. AB 35 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 53, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Revenue, revises provisions relating to sales of tobacco products. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 2, this act becomes effective on January 1, 2024. End of bill.
Senator Spearman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 53, in its first reprint, revises existing penalties for sales of tobacco products to persons under the age of 21. The bill specifies that for violations which occur within a 24-month period at the same premise, a licensee is liable for a civil penalty of $2,500 for the first violation, $5,000 for the second, $7,500 for the third, and $10,000 for the fourth and any subsequent violation. The act becomes effective on January 1st, 2024.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to Assembly Bill 53. The penalties in this are excessive. We already have penalties that penalize the clerks, and as anybody who's been into a convenience store can't help but note, most of the people that are working in there are obviously making very low wages. They are disproportionately immigrants, and we already are trying to punish them, and then now we're going to add an additional punishment onto the people that own these businesses and are trying to keep these businesses afloat. For those you've also can't help but note, in every single business I've been to in Nevada practically, there is a help wanted sign. All these small businesses are struggling just to get people to work in the first place, so they are required, currently under law, to ask anybody under the age of 40 before they're allowed to buy rolling papers, any tobacco products, and now we're going to not only punish the poor clerks, which I think is already existing law, but now we're going to add an additional penalty for the owners of these small businesses, penalizing them up to $10,000, and that, by the way, is a 2-year window. So you got 1 violation, 2 violations, all handled in so many cases by these poor clerks and people working behind the counters on these little businesses. I mean, this is really excessive. We're going after the wrong people. And frankly, it reminds me so much of the war on drugs. It has been remarkably ineffective. All these sting operations that they conduct occasionally, I haven't seen a bit of evidence to show that this has stopped anybody under the age of 21 from getting tobacco products and using them. All it's done is allow law enforcement to go into these convenience stores, set up sting operations, harass clerks, and then now we're going to add additionally to punishing the clerks, we're now going to go after the business owners themselves for the behavior of some of these clerks. In so many cases, too, these clerks at best speak broken English, and you're trying to force them now to comply with state laws, ask everybody who wants to buy anything the age of 40 and under. I mean, it's just overkill. So we should all support our small business community, and while it is laudable to try to encourage people not to smoke, to go around punishing businesses for up to $10,000 for some relatively minor violation of a clerk over time is just completely unreasonable. So I would urge my colleagues to vote no on Assembly Bill 53.
Senator Severs-Ganser.
Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, rise in opposition to Assembly Bill 53. We struggled with this in committee because the disincentive should be targeted at the clerk and the owner. I think it should be both of them, but what's happened is there's really little to no incentive for a clerk to sell to someone who's not eligible to purchase tobacco. And those people typically are paid low wages, minimum wage, but what happens is the owner, as was mentioned, can be fined $2,500, $5,000, $7,500, $10,000, and again, I think it's very hard to control your employees every single minute of the day because it's a 40 and under threshold. It makes it very difficult to make sure that you track people, and so I think the disincentive should be more on the clerk, or should be higher on the clerk, because what may happen is that you have individuals, and it talks about employees or agent. We've never really figured out what an agent was, but an employer or agent can make a mistake, and maybe they can make a mistake twice in a 2-year period, and then the owner has to pay $5,000. So it's just like a huge fine for someone when it's very difficult to control your employees every single minute. And again, we want to make sure that there are penalties and that we don't sell to folks who are not eligible to have tobacco. But the disincentive targeted the owner much greater extent than it did the employee. Thank you.
Senator Stone.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. This issue is a very personal one for me. My mother started smoking tobacco at about 12 years old. Now, of course, when my mom was young, we didn't know the dangers associated with nicotine and the tars, the cancerous tars that are inhaled. And she was a rabid smoker, a 3-packer a day, Marlboro. And I'll be honest with you, I remember driving from Anaheim, where I was raised, to Los Angeles in the car. I was in the back seat. I was angry because my little sister, who was just born, was sitting in the front seat. I was a little jealous about that, a little bit angry, but we were listening to the radio, and I remember the news came on and said that Nat King Cole had died. I think it was 1969. So I'm taking many of you back before you were even born. And as we were driving to Los Angeles, my mother was puffing on a cigarette, and they said that Nat King Cole had died from lung cancer attributable from his smoking. And I said, Mom, why are you smoking if it can kill you? And she explained to me that it was a horrific habit and that she was going to do everything she can to stop smoking. And that was kind of the end of the conversation. For those of you that don't know it, probably the one thing that is much more addictive than heroin is nicotine. And the morbidity and mortality associated with people that have smoked throughout certainly the last century is overwhelming, not only in the loss of life, but the people that are sentenced to a life of living on breathing machines and nebulizers so they can catch a breath. And what we saw in the past few decades is we've seen the smoking actually coming down because of public education programs. And my mom, about 20 years before her untimely death at 57 years old, finally took the advice and quit smoking. And then she discovered at 57 years old that she had a lump in her breast. And she went to the doctor, and I'll never forget, I was at Lake Shasta on a ski vacation, and I got this phone call from my mom on my cell, and she goes, I had a lump examined today, and Jeff, I don't think it's going to be a good result for some reason. I said, Mom, you're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Everything will work out. Well, she called me 3 days later to tell me that it was malignant tumor and that she had breast cancer and she was going to go see an oncologist. I'll fast track. She died 6 months from the date of the diagnosis, and we did an autopsy on her and found out that the breast cancer really wasn't breast cancer. It was really lung cancer that metastasized to the breast and then metastasized to the liver and ultimately claimed her life. So even though she quit smoking, she did enough damage to her lungs and had enough carcinogens in her body that she succumbed to lung cancer via the breast, via the liver. Now, had she been alive today with new pharmaceuticals that are on the market, I think she would have survived. But it was a grisly death, and that's the reason why I want to stand up and I want to support AB 53. So, as many of you know, this is the 28th year that I've been serving as an elected official. I would say that I'm in the twilight years now of public service. It's been a wonderful experience, and I think I've touched a lot of lives in my service. And while I was a county supervisor in Riverside County, that was the 10th largest county in the country, even bigger than Clark County, we had a problem with retailers that were selling tobacco to minors. And I put an ordinance together that did this. It was a 3 strikes and you're out. We made a press release telling retailers that we're going to be very strict. You need to have somebody show your ID before you sell them any tobacco products. The first time you get caught selling to a minor, you got a fine. The second time, you got a suspension to your license. And the third time, you got a revocation. It was harsh. It was a sledgehammer. And let me tell you, the owners of these stores educated their employees. You make sure you get the ID, and you make sure that they're of age to buy tobacco. And I can tell you that prospectively after that, we didn't have a problem in Riverside County with people selling tobacco to minors. I believe that a law like this is going to help keep young people from this nasty addiction that is a lifetime sentence to emphysema, to asthma, and yes, cancer. So I urge all of you to make the right decision in memory of my mother, Charlene Rose Friedman, may she rest in peace, to make sure that other families don't have to endure the pain that my family's had to endure with the loss of my mom. Please vote yes on AB 53.
Any further remarks? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 19. The noes are 2. AB 53 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 54, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Education, makes various changes relating to education. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 47, this act becomes effective on July 1,
Mr. President.
2023. End of bill.
Senator Harris.
Mr. President, can I get a 1-minute recess, please?
Okay, we'll take a 1-minute recess.
I'm ready when you are, Mr. President.
Okay. The Senate is back in order. We are on AB 54.
Mr. President, can we go to order business number 9?
Okay, we are on order of business 9.
Mr. President, I would like to move AB 54 from today's general file to the next legislative day.
Okay, you've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Assembly Bill 60, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs, revises provisions governing local improvements. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 4, this act becomes effective upon passage and approval.
Senator Orenshall.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 60 requires the governing body of a municipality that acquires or improves a neighborhood improvement project to annually prepare an amendment to the assessment roll and an estimate of the expenditures for the next fiscal year, to provide notice and hold a public hearing regarding the amendment, and to confirm and mail notice of that amendment. If passed, the bill is effective upon passage and approval.
Are there any remarks on the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the noes are 0. AB 60 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 127, introduced by Assemblywoman Howdigy, revises provisions governing Medicare supplemental policies. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, to enact as follows, Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 2, this act becomes effective on July 1, 2023. End of bill.
Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 127 prohibits an insurer, other person, or entity from varying the commission or paying differential commissions associated with the purchase of Medicare supplemental policies during the open enrollment period, or otherwise treating Medicare supplemental policies purchased during the open enrollment period differently for the purposes of commission for any reason. In addition, an insurer, other person, or entity must treat the purchase of a Medicare supplemental policy during the open enrollment period in the same manner as a renewal of a Medicare supplemental policy for purposes of paying a commission.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the noes are 0. AB 127 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 132, introduced by Assemblywoman Cohen, etc., requires the establishment of a regional opioid task force in Clark County. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate Assembly, do enact as follows, Section 1 and Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 3 and Section 3 and bill.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 132 requires the Clark County Board of County Commissioners to establish a regional opioid task force to study certain issues related to opioid overdose fatalities. The bill also establishes the membership of the task force. The task force must submit a report to the governor and the director of Legislative Council Bureau with a summary of its work and any recommendations for legislation. The bill is effective October 1, 2023, and expires by limitation on December 31, 2024.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the noes are 0. AB 132 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 144, introduced by Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch, etc., revises provisions governing the sale of certain lighting products. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows, Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 10, this act becomes effective on January 1, 2025. End of bill.
Senator Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 144 prohibits the sale and distribution of certain new fluorescent lamps. The bill establishes civil penalties for violation and authorizes the Attorney General to bring a civil action against a person with repeated violations. The bill is effective January 1, 2025.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was in on the hearing on this bill, and I still am strongly opposed to it. Last year in Nevada, according to testimony, there was 1.8 million of these light bulbs sold in Nevada. Frankly, these light bulbs are already becoming archaic, and they will go out naturally through the normal market processes. The amount of mercury in them is so insignificant. In fact, the batteries in your wristwatches, cell phones, computers all have 5 to 10 times more mercury than these light bulbs do. They basically have zero health impact. I went and researched on it. There's been one case from 1987 of actual mercury poisoning from one of these light bulbs. Like I said, that was 1987 when these were still relatively new. This is, I'm afraid, a case of the legislature going way overboard and doing some micromanagement on issues that the marketplace itself is going to correct and take care of. Also, the bill itself in Section 6 has about 30 at least different exemptions to it. So for any kind of a retailer trying to figure out what light bulbs he can legally sell or not sell, it would almost be impossible unless you're an expert. If you just actually read Section 6 of the bill, how many different types of these types of bulbs are going to be allowed still, even if we pass the law. So while I think it's always good to try to protect people, I think this is a case of where it's kind of a feel-good, do something that really doesn't have any impact kind of a law, and we should oppose those kind of things. We should not be, as legislators, after a 1 or 2 hour hearing, make decisions that affect millions of people and what they're going to purchase and what they're going to use, and even worse, make criminals out of ordinary businesses that may be still selling some of these type of light bulbs. So I would urge my colleagues to vote no on AB 144.
Senator Buck.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with my colleague and stand in opposition to this bill. I'm not sure why we're getting involved in the free market when these bulbs are oftentimes more affordable, and especially for our low-income disadvantaged families that may have to use them as opposed to paying more for the LED ones. And why not, while we're at it, outlaw the A-track too?
Any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the Secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the Secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 12, the noes are 9. AB 144 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 163, introduced by Assemblywoman Gonzalez, etc., and Senator Spearman, etc., revises provisions governing employment. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows, Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 5 into subsection 2 into bill.
Senator Buck.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 163 requires an employer to provide a certain amount of paid or unpaid leave to an employee who has been employed by the employer for at least 90 days and who is a victim of sexual assault or whose family or household member is a victim of sexual assault. The leave must be used within 1 year of the date on which the sexual assault occurred, may be used consecutively or intermittently, and must be deducted from leave permitted by the federal family and Medical Leave Act of 1993 under certain circumstances. An employer must maintain a record of leave days used by each employee for a 2-year period and make those records available for inspection by the Labor Commissioner upon request. The Labor Commissioner is required to prepare a bulletin setting forth the right to these benefits and require employers to post the bulletin in the workplace. The administrator of the Employment Security Division of the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation is prohibited from denying certain persons impacted by sexual assault for receiving unemployment compensation benefits and is authorized to request the person furnish evidence to support his or her claim for benefits. The measure requires an employer to provide reasonable accommodations for an employee who is a victim of sexual assault or whose family or household member is a victim of sexual assault, and prohibits an employer from denying employment to or taking certain employment actions against an employee because he or she requested such an accommodation, or because of certain or other circumstances related to the employee or a family or household member of the employee being a victim of sexual assault. This bill is effective upon passage and approval for the purposes of adopting any regulations and performing any other preparatory administrative tasks and or on January 1st, 2024 for all other purposes. Thank you.
Are there any remarks from the floor? Senator Hansen. Okay, any further remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the noes are 0. AB 163 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly.
Assembly Bill 169, introduced by Assemblywoman Gorlow, et cetera, and Senator Canizaro, et cetera, revises provisions governing the labeling of feminine hygiene products. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1 into Section 1.
Are there any amendments?
There are none. Section 5 into subsection 2 into bill.
Senator Titus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Assembly Bill 169 requires each package or box containing feminine hygiene products that is manufactured on or after January 1st, 2025 for sale or distribution in Nevada to have a label listing all product ingredients in order of weight, using standardized nomenclature, or using the name established for the Center for Baby and Adult Hygiene Products with certain exceptions. The manufacturers must also post a list of ingredients on their website and update the label at certain intervals when changes to ingredients occur. Violations of these provisions are a gross misdemeanor. This bill becomes effective upon passage and approval for purposes of adopting regulations and performing preparatory administrative tasks on January 1st of 2024. Mr. President and members of this body, we have just heard rather passionate and emotional testimony about the dangers of nicotine and cigarettes. But on those cigarette products, there's a warning. There's a Surgeon General's warning about the potential negative effects of those products. Women are not offered those on these products. There's no such warning on them. At least by labeling, it'll give a woman a chance to research if she chooses. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this. Thank you.
Any remarks from the floor? Seeing none, the secretary will open the roll. Anyone wish to change their vote? Seeing none, the secretary will close the roll. The yeses are 21, the noes are 0. AB 169 has received a constitutional majority, is declared passed and ordered to the Assembly. All right, we were going to take a brief recess. Have a quorum? Okay. The Senate is back in order. Senator Cannizzaro.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate stand in recess until 3:30.
Okay, we are in recess till 3:30.